Happy Monday, everybody. Hope you have a great week as we lead into America's 250th birthday coming up this weekend. Planning a little bit of a different kind of honoring type video for that one. I'll release it, I think, on the 4th. Looking forward to putting that together for us. Listen, today is one of those research article breakdowns that I like to do because it gives you the evidence when it's time to have conversations or rebut people when they try to tell you that women are taking advantage of the workplace or somehow oppressed in several different areas. So today, let's have a look at loss aversion, risk, and optimism between men and women. As we know, on average, men are willing to take more risks than women, but simply knowing that difference exists is very different than understanding the underlying psychology of it all. In this 2023 article that I'm showing right up here, it gives some of those answers, including what's happening psychologically when men and women evaluate risk differently. Now, as you can see, this article is titled Gender Differences in Optimism, Loss Aversion, and Attitudes Toward Risk. It was written by Chris Dawson of the University of Bath. And Dawson's intention was to identify psychological mechanisms that can help explain why men and women respond differently when asked how willing they are to take different risks in general. And I think he did something rather clever and impressive to assess this over several years. I'll explain that here in just a moment. His idea was that risky decision involves two judgments. First, how likely is a negative outcome? And second, how painful will it be if it happens? Right? So two people can look at the same investment, promotion, or career change and agree on the odds of being successful. Is those odds 50-50, 90-10, 25-75? Now, although Dawson didn't expressly measure odds of success exactly like that, his intention was to determine whether the genders make different decisions because one experiences possible loss as more costly, right? So they can perceive the same odds, but the cost of not succeeding is perceived differently. So the study focuses on loss aversion and financial optimism. Loss aversion is the tendency for losses to carry more psychological weight than equivalent gains. So in, I guess, basic terms, losing $100 can feel worse than gaining $100 feels good. Now, financial optimism is participants in this example, the expectation that their future finances will improve. And the basic premise is that someone who expects a better outcome and experiences less pain from a possible loss will, of course, be more willing to take a chance. And that's what I like about this article. He didn't stop with just the surface level observation that men are more risk tolerant. And it also addresses how men and women differ on loss sensitivity and future expectations. So here's what Dawson did. I'll put up the data sample for more information up here just so I don't have to go through all of the details verbally. As far as the study measures, loss aversion was interesting to me. This is one of the parts I really liked. Instead of asking people something generic like, do you hate losing money? It was determined by how year-to-year changes in household income related to changes in psychological well-being, which was measured with the General Health Questionnaire. That's a very, very solid measure. It's used a lot. It's very reliable. And I like it when researchers find ways to improve self-reported perceptions like that. If a loss in income caused substantially more distress than an equal gain had created well-being, then that person was more loss-averse by Dawson's definition. Optimism here was measured through repeated forecasts about whether respondents expected to be financially better off, worse off, or about the same 1 year into the future. In the 18th wave, participants rated their general willingness to take risks from 1 to 10. And because Dawson estimated loss aversion and optimism from the earlier waves before looking at the final risk measure, the design gives a more credible direction of association than simply measuring everything at the same time. So pretty solid there, I think. Now keep in mind that optimism was a measure of financial expectations about circumstances that respondents believed were at least partly under their own control. The risk question was general, rather than limited to investing or gambling of sorts, which is helpful because he was trying to explain a broad attitude toward uncertainty, not just gambling or losing money in the stock market, for example. So here's what he found. Three main findings here. First, women, of course, were more loss averse than men. And the key finding is that men and women didn't just differ significantly in their response to income gains. The difference came from losses being psychologically less painful for men than for women. Men don't seem to be as bothered, perturbed, when they have a loss. Second main finding is that men were more financially optimistic. They were more likely to expect their finances to improve, even though the study found no gender differences in the distribution of actual household income changes. So the optimism gap was not simply explained by men receiving better financial outcomes. They were equal between the genders. And the third thing is that men rated themselves as more willing to take risks. Again, maybe no surprise here, but when we collectively look at all three of them, now we're starting to build a really good story. Now, although I'm not a huge fan of these types of self-report variables, list your risk tolerance on 1 through 10, these types of self-reported variables sometimes have their limitations, I get it, but there was solid overlap between the groups, with men's most common answer being 7 out of 10. That was their median response. No, that would be their mode. Apologies, getting my central tendencies mixed up. So on most men answered 7 out of 10, and women responded 5 out of 10. The overall pattern was clear in that men in the sample were more likely to say that they were prepared to take risks. Now, Dawson also did a decomposition analysis in which he accounted for the big 5 personality traits. I'll actually put them on the screen up here. I'm not going to get into that a whole lot for the sake of time mostly, but feel free to download this article from the link below if you're interested in reading that part. So let's talk about a little bit about what those findings actually mean. The obvious takeaway suggests that men may be more willing to take risks, partly because a possible financial loss carries less emotional weight for them. It doesn't affect them as much. When men and women observe the same potential risk, they don't perceive it the same way before making a decision or acting upon it. And that matters a lot right here, because many opportunities are structured around uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. And we live in a very uncertain world. So whether it's starting a business, taking a commission-heavy salary, or climbing that old corporate ladder, all of those involve risk and potential loss. And the average gender difference in loss sensitivity will shape who applies for jobs, who stays in a risky field, and who's willing to go out on a limb for financial gains. More directly, it means that discussions around the imaginary glass ceiling and other outcome gaps are absolutely baseless when they're explained only as discrimination. We can't seriously assume that every difference in occupational outcomes is because people don't like women. That's nonsense. The gap is about uncertainty, competition, possible failure, and still doing something anyway. Of course, while taking a risk may bring more opportunity and more upside, it also does, of course, involve more failure, financial loss, and wrong decisions. But men's greater willingness to accept those help explain why they appear at the high end of many outcomes, especially in careers and in the labor force. And that is why men are overrepresented in some of the worst jobs and why their numbers of failures often outpace women. It's a trade-off, not a virtue or pathology. Now, real quick, I do want to say that this study does have a couple of limits. The first one, obviously, that I should mention is that the data were collected between 1991 and 2008, but it was published in 2023. The broader point is very simple in that when people talk about sex differences in outcomes, they often begin with the end of the story, and it's almost always entirely anecdotal. They see more men in high-paying jobs, entrepreneurship, investing, and they're CEOs and leading police stations. And then they immediately jump to systems, biases, or systematic exclusion. Why don't we have more female CEOs, more police chiefs, and why aren't women running and owning more hotels? Well, the research shows that average differences in the way that men and women experience possible losses can be a very meaningful part of that story. Ignoring it doesn't make the difference disappear. It only produces a weaker explanation for why the outcomes exist in the first place. So tell us about your risks and how they did or didn't pay off. What's been your experience? Looking forward to those comments. I'll see you all soon. Don't forget to share this one with somebody. Take care, guys.